A couple of weeks ago, Audio Movers released Omnibus 3, a Mac application that allows you to route multi-channel audio not only within your Mac, but also between computers across a network. Now, if you have been watching my channel for a while, you're probably aware that I'm a big fan of Audio Movers. They were the first to introduce a plugin as well as a standalone application that brought Apple spatial audio rendering to digital audio workstations other than Logic Pro. Now, this plugin and application is called the Binaural Renderer for Apple Music, and I did a video about it a while back. I'll leave a link in the description in case you want to check that out. Now, Audio Movers sells Omnibus 3 together with the Binaural Renderer in a bundle called Immersive Essentials, and it is this bundle that caught my attention. And in this bundle, in particular, the use case that they're describing, where they show how to use Omnibus together with the Binaural Renderer in order to have a complete change, starting with the digital audio workstation, going through the Dolby Atmos renderer, and then into the Binaural Renderer for Apple Music. Now, here they show it with Pro Tools. So essentially the idea is that you start out with the digital audio workstation, you send the bed and the objects into the Dolby Bridge, which then kind of forwards that to the Dolby Atmos renderer. Now, in this schematic, they also show that the metadata goes through the Dolby Bridge. That's technically not correct. Metadata goes into the renderer directly. Now, in the renderer, then the rendering happens, and the renderer generates an output, the 7.1.4 output, as well as a stereo output. This is then, according to the schematic, forward into the Omnibus virtual driver. And from the Omnibus virtual driver, it goes into the binaural renderer for Apple Music. Both the 7.1.4 signal as well as the stereo signal. The 7.1.4 signal can then be bypassed, or it can bypass the binaural renderer and go directly into your speaker setup, but at the same time it can also forward that into the Apple binaural rendering engine, and that kind of renders that in Apple Music fashion in binaural, and you can then listen to that in headphones, and you can switch between listening or monitoring everything in 7.1.4 or in stereo binaural, either through the Apple binaural rendering engine or through the regular output from the Dolby Atmos renderer. What I want to do in this video is to go through this setup and see how well that works, and we will actually find out that in the vast majority of use cases this setup is actually overkill. You can usually achieve the exact same thing with just the binaural renderer and without using Omnibus at all. So this is going to be an interesting one. Let's get started. Before I open up the Atmos project, a quick reminder to hit the like and subscribe buttons. We recently reached 25,000 subscribers, and I think we can do even better than that. Your support is greatly appreciated. And I should also point out that this is not a sponsored video. I purchased all the software that I'm going to use in this video with my own money. And with that being said, let's open up our Atmos session. Now I'm going to use Ableton for this example. It doesn't really make any difference which digital audio workstation you're using as long as you're on a Mac and as long as you're working with the external Dolby Atmos renderer. Now this project consists of 3 loops. You might have heard that before. Let's just have a brief listen. So very simple loops, and the way this is set up is very simple as in Dolby Atmos project with the external Dolby Atmos renderer. So in the live preferences or in the settings, we have the Dolby Audio Bridge as the output. Then we have 3 object pairs that are tracks 1, 2, and 3. These object pairs route to outputs 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, and 16. And then on each of these tracks, we have a music panner, and the music panner routes the metadata into the Dolby Atmos renderer, which is on the local machine, and the object pairs obviously have to match the external outputs. And then on top of everything, we have the LTC, the timecode information. So there is a timecode plugin on one of those tracks, and that timecode information is output to channel number 129. And the Dolby Atmos renderer then accepts that input in the essentially in the input device, which is the Dolby Atmos audio bridge. And the LTC input channel, once again, was channel 129. And then we just need to make sure that the frame rate is consistent between the LTC plugin and the Dolby Atmos renderer. And that's really everything that we need to do. Also note that we have set the headphone render mode to binaural. This will become important a little bit later. And that's really everything that we need to do in order to get our Dolby Atmos project going. And once again, this is essentially how it sounds. And if we look into the renderer, we have this 6 objects here kind of placed in the front of everything doesn't really make any difference where they are for this particular example. Okay, so what we need to do now is we want to use the Omnibus virtual device in order to route the output not into the Rodecaster the way I have it right now, but rather in the binaural renderer from Audio Movers, so that we can actually monitor everything in true Apple Music fashion. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to set up the Omnibus driver. So let's open up Omnibus. And here we have Omnibus. Now, if you open that up for the first time, it looks a little bit like that. It has a virtual device called Omnibus A. You have up to 4 virtual devices that you can set, and you can set a certain number of channels, and the number of channels that you can configure is up to 256 channels. So this is actually fairly unique. To my knowledge, it's the only application that allows you to go that far. So what we need really is, in our particular case, what we want to do is we want to have the 7.1.4 output sent into the binaural renderer, because that the binaural renderer can take up to 7.1.4. And then in addition to that, you remember in the schematics on the Audio Mover side, we also want to have the headphone output sent into the binaural renderer. So we need a minimum of 14 channels. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select 16 channels here. This is enough. We don't really need more. It obviously depends a lot on your particular setup. If you have more complex setup and you're using re-renders and all kinds of things, then you might have a kind of a higher requirement in terms of the number of channels that you need. But in our particular case, 16 channels is more than enough. So let's set that up as a 16-channel device. And let's just kind of connect all of those. Now, when you first do that, it came up as already connected because I did that before. But when you first do that, you actually have to manually connect them, and you do that by simply clicking on these little kind of intersections here, and that will connect them. Now, if you are setting up a 256 channel device for the first time, unfortunately, it seems that you have to actually do that one by one. So you have to click 256 times. Maybe I'm missing something. In case I am, let me know in the comment section. So we have this set up now as Omnibus A, and that essentially means that I can use this as an output device. So I'm going to go into the Dolby Atmos renderer, and in the Dolby Atmos renderer and the preferences, I'm going to switch that over from the Rodecaster that I have right now to my Omnibus A device. And then the next thing I obviously need to do is I need to start up the binaural renderer from Audio Movers. So let's open that up as well. So here we have the binaural renderer. Now, I'm not going to use Apple headphones today. I've done that in previous videos, and if you're interested in how that actually works, follow the link in the description, and there you can see. Here I'm just going to use my regular headphones, and I'm just going to route everything through the binaural renderer. Now, in the settings, obviously I need to set up the input device, and that's already kind of set up because I tested everything before I recorded that video, and as the Omnibus A device. And that is pretty much everything that I need to do. The render output in my particular case shouldn't be the speakers. Actually, I want to send it on to, where are we? The Rodecaster secondary. There we are, and that should kind of forward everything to the Rodecaster. So let me just kind of play that audio again, and let's see if we hear something. And yes, we do. So it's now coming in. Well, first of all, it's coming in at the renderer. The renderer converts that into 7.1.4. It is then passed on into the Omnibus device, and here we see all the channels coming in and how they are routed. And then it's forwarded to the binaural renderer, and it's coming in here. It's a little hot, so maybe we can, and that's actually one of the nice things, we can actually kind of reduce the gain of the output a bit. And that essentially then comes into the binaural renderer of Apple Music, and there it is rendered. And I currently, once again, I'm not using Apple headphones, so the only options that I have here are the static binaural renderer or the binaural renderer personalized. Now, at the moment, I don't really have the headphone signal kind of routed through, and let me for a moment just stop the audio. One of the things that the schematic showed us that you can also route the headphone output of the Dolby Atmos renderer through the Omnibus device into the binaural renderer for Apple Music. And if you go into the settings, you will actually see that there are 2 additional inputs that you can choose, and they are kind of set to channels 13, 14, 15, 16. It's essentially kind of the channels after channel 12, which are the first 12 channels that are the 7.1.4. And that is currently not coming in. And the reason it's not coming in is because if I go into the Dolby Atmos renderer settings, into the setup, into room setup, here I can set up where which channels the headphone output is going to, and by default this is going to outputs 127 and 128. So in order to make that available to me in the binaural renderer, I need to switch that over to 13 and 14. Now I could also use an omnibus virtual device that has 128 channels and then simply kind of route those into the binaural renderer, but I chose to only use 16 channels in the omnibus device. So this is essentially what I'm going to do. So let's set 13 and 14. Now, one important caveat here is that this will only work if you have only 12 speakers configured in the Dolby Atmos renderer. So if you go into the room setup here and you select more than 12 speakers, then when you select the outputs for the headphones, the smallest output number that you can select is essentially one more than the number of speakers that you have. So if, for example, if you configured 20 speakers here, then you cannot choose anything below 21 here for the headphone output. And that essentially would mean that the omnibus settings would require you to have a higher channel count because you can't route it in at channel 13 and 14. And that should now be everything that there is. So let's just play the audio again. So let's go back into live and let's play the audio again. And in the Dolby Atmos renderer, we now see that there is also the auxiliary input coming in. And this is now the binaural rendering from the Dolby Atmos renderer. You remember that in the Dolby Atmos renderer we set the headphone mode to binaural. So this is a binaural rendering, the Dolby binaural rendering. And here we have the Apple binaural rendering. And this actually works reasonably well. This actually works very, very well. So no issues there. The main issue that I'm having is that actually omnibus in this particular case is not really needed. And the reason it is not really needed is because the binaural renderer comes with its own virtual device that you can use. So what I'm going to do now is I'm simply going to quit omnibus here for a second. And instead of sending that into the omnibus device, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send that into the binaural rendering bridge that comes with the binaural renderer. So here we have the binaural rendering link. So let's accept that. And then essentially in the binaural renderer, let's do the same thing in the settings. And instead of kind of using omnibus, I'm using the binaural renderer here. Where are we? The binaural rendering link, and press OK. And then if I now press play on Apple, I am essentially achieving exactly the same thing. Binaural rendering from the Dolby Atmos renderer. Binaural rendering from the binaural renderer for Apple Music by Audiomovers. So as you can see, and this is actually one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video, Omnibus by itself is a really cool software application that gives you a lot of options that you can use, and I really, really like it. I just want to be very, very clear about that. But in that particular use case that is on the website, it is actually overkill. You don't really need it. The binaural renderer comes with its own virtual device that you can use that has exactly the same functionality. The only thing is that it maxes out at 16 channels. So if you have a more complex speaker setup, for example, then you can't use the binaural rendering link because that once again only has 16 channels. And as we said before, if you have, for example, 20 speakers set up in the Dolby Atmos renderer, then the headphone outputs, the smallest numbers that you can choose are 21 and 22, and that is already more than the 16s that you have available in the binaural rendering link. So if you have a more complex studio setup, obviously, then Omnibus is the only choice that you have. In this particular kind of setting, there are other virtual device applications out there like Loopback from Aroga Amoeba, for example, that you could use as well. But essentially Omnibus then would be a good choice. But for those of you who are just working with 7.1.4 and are working on one machine without networking anything, that is actually overkill. You don't really need that. And that is one of the reasons I made this video. I just wanted to point it out. So does this mean that Omnibus does not serve a purpose when working with the Dolby Atmos renderer together with the Audiomovers binaural renderer? No, obviously not. Omnibus has a couple of features that you will not find anywhere else and which might be critical to your workflow. This particularly includes its multi-channel networking capabilities and the fact that you can set up to 4 virtual devices with up to 256 channels each. Most other virtual device applications max out at 64 channels. And on top of that, Omnibus is very straightforward to use. I actually like it a lot, and it will most likely become a standard tool in my toolbox. But it is important to understand that for the majority of people, the binaural rendering bridge that comes included with the binaural renderer is really all that you need, and chances are that Omnibus is overkill for your setup. So as always, it is important that you try before you buy. And that's everything I wanted to say today. Thanks again for watching my videos. I truly appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments, please use the comment section below or join us on our Discord server for a chat. An invite link is in the description below. And with that being said, see you all in the next video.